Greetings and welcome everyone to the Whatcom Peace Justice Center's 17th Annual International Day of Peace. 2020, as you all know, has already been a very historic year, and we're topping this year with a historic set of events to share with you throughout the weekend. Our theme for this year, No Justice, No Peace, will honor the history as well as the future of Black-led uprisings against racial injustice and state violence. We have here today today and tomorrow, some amazing guests, and hope that you will find this year's virtual version of International Day of Peace a very inspiring experience. My name is Aline Prata, and tonight I'm joined virtually by our favorite historian and board secretary, Josh Cerretti, former ED and Peace and Justice Center's friend, Marie Marchand, Professor Emeritus Larry Estrada, and the star of tonight, Professor Damani Johnson, who will be delivering his acceptance speech for the recently renamed Rosemary&Howard Award. Josh will also cover pretty quickly in a couple of minutes a little bit of why this name change happened and what does that mean. As you all know, tonight is more of our local night, so we'll be focusing on what Peace and Justice looks like locally. And I thought it would be great to just give a little bit of background of the center, right? Like why are we here and why are we about? So the idea of the Peace and Justice Center came about in 2001 in the context of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, when some community members from the Bellingham Whatcom Peace Vigil, which happens every Friday in the corner between Cornwall and Magnolia, decided that we needed to have a community center to connect and organize, as well as centralize some of the efforts for peace and social justice in Bellingham, Whatcom County, and connected to the struggles worldwide. So now I'll go ahead and pass it to Josh, who will get us started and grounded with the land acknowledgement and fill us up on the name change for the award. Josh?
The Whatcom Peace and Justice Center carries a piece of history from our Coast Salish neighbors in the very name that we have. The word Whatcom is an anglicization of a Lakhtamish word, Whatcom, often translated as the place of noisy waters. And today the center is just a few blocks away from those original noisy waters, the Whatcom, the falls on Whatcom Creek in today's Maritime Heritage Park. It's no surprise that many of the earliest white settlers in this region were both virulently anti-Black and anti-Indigenous. For example, George Pickett, who led the U.S. Army occupation of Bellingham Bay for 5 years, resigned his commission in the U.S. Army to go join the Confederate Army and fight for white supremacy in the Civil War. Edmund Fitzhugh, the first government-appointed agent in charge of the Lummi Reservation, did the same thing. And this legacy, it tells us something about the problem of peace and justice locally, because this area became desperately in need of peace and justice as soon as the US military occupation began in 1856. And until this ongoing injustice is fully addressed, there can't be true peace here. As Lummi Hereditary Chief Bill James said last year at the Vine Deloria Conference, people have to know what happened to Lummi people in order to better understand who they are. We note with sadness his recent passing and offer our condolences to all who are in mourning. The Whatcom Peace Justice Center is committed to continued solidarity with the Lummi Nation and Nooksack tribe, as well as Coast Salish people across the region and Indigenous people across Turtle Island. We look forward to continued opportunities to learn from, work with, and support movements for Indigenous sovereignty. Since 2005, the Whatcom Peace and Justice Center has recognized the work of over a dozen local peacemakers through the Howard Harris Lifetime Peacemaker Award. This year, for the first time ever, we will instead give our honoree the Rosemary and Howard Harris Lifetime Peacemaker Award. This small but significant enhancement to the award specifically honors the legacy of Rosemary Harris, an educator, midwife, and active Quaker who played a key role in fostering local movements for peace and justice. Rosemary Harris was born in Indiana in 1915, moving to Bellingham in the 1960s. Not only was she the founder of the Rufus Jones School of the Pacific, but Rosemary Harris also initiated the Bellingham Peace Vigil in 1966 alongside her husband Howard Harris and fellow Quaker Colleen Dickinson. That silent vigil for peace by the city's Christmas tree blossomed and endured, and eventually became the longest continuously running peace vigil in the world. Rosemary remained a dedicated advocate for peace and justice until her passing in 2009. The board of the Whatcom Peace and Justice Center, after consultation with the Harris family, moved to rename this award after Rosemary and Howard Harris in honor of all the work that they did collectively and individually. We hope this change prompts all of us to consider how we might, in our own movements and our own organizations, make the work done by people who are not men more visible. I would now like to introduce WPJC's friend and former executive director, Marie Marchand, who will introduce this year's awardee.
Thank you, Josh. It is wonderful to be back at International Day of Peace, a day of worldwide ceasefire. And I'm happy to see that the Whatcom Peace and Justice Center has continued to grow powerfully in its voice for change. Today, I am honored to help introduce the recipient of this year's Rosemary and Howard Harris Lifetime Peacemaker Award, Vernon Damani Johnson. Damani is a longtime social justice advocate and political science professor. His work in various intersecting movements is both local and global. Our community, especially, has deeply benefited from his contributions and achievements. When the militia burned a cross in Whatcom County in 1999, he co-founded the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force. He also served as president of the Northwest Coalition for Human Dignity. In 2015, he became the director of the Ralph Monroe Institute for Civic Engagement, which hosts an annual seminar on topics related to education and social justice. Since the emergence of Black Lives Matter in the summer of 2014, Damani has spoken publicly about racism in America, like he always had, but in a new context. He advises activists on the tenets of community organizing, and in addition, he gives anti-racism workshops to nonprofit and governmental organizations. What I appreciate most about Damani is that he shows up. He shows up when invited to rallies, teach-ins, media programs, and conversations with a commitment to hear the viewpoints of others, while powerfully sharing his own values and worldview. Employing the strategies of nonviolence, he works to dismantle what Dr. King named the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. Now, Professor and friend of Damani's, Larry Estrada, would like to say a few words.
It's really an honor and a privilege to introduce my good friend, Vernon Damani Johnson, for this year's award. And let me just say a few things about Damani in relationship to Western Washington University, where I've known him over the past 31 years as a professor and administrator at Western. In terms of Damani, he was not only active within political science, but he was very active in the areas of women's studies, American cultural studies, as well as designing new curricula in Pan-African politics, Black studies, comparative cultural studies, and social theory, creating a bevy of new courses for Western students and the university's general university requirements. However, his academic profession, in the eyes of many, is paled by his continuous struggle for justice and equity in the community of Bellingham that he and his wife, Rebecca, chose for their home. While publishing, teaching, and heavily involved in university politics, he was always involved in community issues and causes that spoke to social justice. Based on his political and scholarly work, he was chosen to head up the prestigious Ralph Monroe Center for Civic Education in 2015, a position he still continues to hold. We often think of icons as national icons, and we as individuals often cite the work of Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez, John Lewis, Rosa Parks, Jesse Jackson, just to name a few. However, we often fail to give full recognition to the local and regional icons that in many cases bring about the desired changes that are advocated at the national level. When we talk about Damani Johnson, he is deserving of the title icon. To many people in Bellingham, Whatcom County, and the Northwest, he has been an icon for change and the struggle for the attainment of human rights for all population groups. When speaking about politics, social justice struggles, and the like, Damani Johnson is nearly always mentioned in every conversation. He is always pointed out to new activist faculty members and community organizers as the person they need to know and they need to work with. Raising a successful family and maintaining a dynamic marriage while excelling in his profession as well as civic duty. He really represents a model of who we can all ascribe to and in many ways imitate. It is an honor for me to introduce my good friend, my colega, and the icon I know the best. And believe me, in my lifetime, I have known various icons. Dr. Vernon Damani Johnson, and a true icon of Bellingham and Whatcom County. Damani.
Well, I want to thank my old friends and comrades, Larry and Marie, for their very gracious introductions and comments about what some would consider my dubious history here in Whatcom County. But I'm so thankful to be acknowledged by my old friends and some of my other friends from the Whatcom Peace and Justice Center in honoring me in receiving the Rosemary and Howard Harris Peacemakers Award. The Whatcom Peace and Justice Center is one of a number of movements that have emerged here in Whatcom County over the last half century and more that have embodied the spirit of American progressivism. In the period after 9/11, which we're just passing the commemoration of again here these last few days, but the original 9/11, 2001, when many of us were silent in the wake of the attacks on the World Trade Center, some progressives, we were all aware of the dangers of American militarism abroad and the short-sightedness with which these kinds of adventures are often undertaken. But many of us were silenced by the massive outpouring of grief and so forth at what had happened on our soil for the first time. But some progressives here in Whatcom County, the Quaker meeting, I think, being at the centerpiece of this work, were ever vigilant and formed the Peace and Justice Center really within weeks after that initial attack on Afghanistan in the fall of 2001. In this, the Peace and Justice Center followed in the footsteps of many similar initiatives over the decades here in Whatcom County. Of course, it was Rosemary and Howard Harris who began the Peace Vigil at the Federal Building during the Vietnam War era, which is still on the record as the longest ongoing peace vigil in the United States. In my time here since the mid-1980s, there were the Jesse Jackson campaigns for the presidency, which established here the Washington State Rainbow Coalition and the Whatcom County Rainbow Coalition. And the Rainbow Coalition here in Whatcom County survived past the millennium as a progressive political organization around supporting progressives to run for office and also initiative campaigns. Was very involved in the Chateau Saint Michel farm workers struggles to unionize that were finally successful in the 1990s. But the Rainbow Coalition at the state level sort of petered out. But a couple of streams that came out of that were the Jobs with Justice, which is a progressive labor organization, which existed here for many, many years. And also the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force, which is the organization that I think that most people associate me with which emerged after cross burnings at farm workers' residences out near the Pole Road back in 1994 that the authorities did not take as seriously as they might have. And after that, the Human Rights Task Force became known for being in the forefront of the fight against the anti-government militia movements around the country, but here in Whatcom County, which was a hotbed of that kind of activity. When the Human Rights Task Force fell on some difficult times after the millennium, the Peace and Justice Center became a safety net for the task force's ongoing, the principal ongoing programs, which were the Martin Luther King Jr. Conference, which is still held every January, and then International Human Rights Day. And then the guy in the White House now got elected almost 4 years ago now. And after tabling at the Women's March, the Human Rights Task Force took some 200 names and about 30 or 40 people started meeting monthly. And I could go on and on about that, but the Human Rights Task Force has experienced a renaissance. And people like myself, Larry Estrada is a fellow board member now, have, I think, been in the middle of the work around race, criminal justice, and law enforcement. And I'm looking at some people here, Aline and Josh here locally, who I know are also a part of that work that's going on here in the county now. But had it not been for the Peace and Justice Center there as a stable organization, the Human Rights Task Force would not have been in a position to be reborn in the way that it has. So I thank you as comrades, you know, across the Progressive Coalition for what you've done for our movement. And we're all part of the same large progressive movement to try to turn this country around, hopefully in a significant way in the next few weeks. And so, you know, we do, you know, we've always just been a foot soldier in this movement for social justice in this country. And, you know, sometimes foot soldiers turn into leaders, you know, but it's a collective leadership. But it is humbling and wonderful to be acknowledged by the Peace and Justice Center today. And so I thank you very much for this award. Thank you.
Congratulations, Damani, and thank you so much for your touching words. You know, it's wonderful to have you here. Thank you. Thanks everyone for watching today. And I can only close with saying, please consider, you know, registering for tomorrow and for today's, and making a donation in honor of the legacy of Rosemary Harris, Howard Harris, and many of the local peacemakers that we have honored throughout the years. Please be sure to tune in tomorrow, Sunday, September 20th at 6 p.m. When we will, you know, re-show this talk again, and also broadcast this year's keynote event, which is a conversation between Aaron Dixon and Melita Imersha, and you won't want to miss that one too. You can also participate at any time this weekend in our Takeout for Peace promotion with Black-owned restaurants in town, as well as checking in our silent auction for peace, which is filled with some great stuff that you can't get anywhere else from all local businesses and artists. So if you're watching this on Saturday, I hope you can go get some yummy Ambo, an Ethiopian restaurant in town. And if you're watching this on Sunday, please go ahead and order from Brandy Wine. I hope that you also got some yummy food yesterday on Friday from Good Bowls. And, you know, the Whatcom Peace and Justice Center really appreciate your support on this International Day of Peace. International Day of Peace is the Whatcom Peace and Justice Center's primary fundraiser of the year. The money that we raise on this event throughout the weekend will keep the center open, and also your beloved executive director fed throughout 2021. We couldn't do that without the help of our incredible sponsors. This year, our sponsors list include the Bellingham Friends Meeting, Veterans for Peace Chapter 111, Bellingham Whatcom Peace Justice Vigil, Whatcom Human Rights Task Force, Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship, First Christian Church,
Community Food Co-op,
Kush Kush, Daylight Properties, A1 Builders, Allied Arts of Whatcom County, Boundary Bay Brewery, Pepper Sisters, Lucky Monkey, Old World Deli, Sound Divers, Phoebe Bird, Menace Brewing, The Local Public House, Old Town Cafe, WWU Theater, Latin America Solidarity Committee from Corvallis, A Legacy of Equity, Leadership, and Organizing Lilo, First Congregational Church, Pax Christi, Amnesty International Chapter 270, and Amnesty International Puget Sound, Mount Baker Media House, Washington Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Washington Against Nuclear Weapons Coalition, as well as St. James Presbyterian Church. Thank you so much for your generous donations and for making this event possible. Thank you, Damani, Marie Marchand, Josh, and Larry Estrada for being here with us today. Have a happy weekend. No justice, no peace.